You never forget the taste of a mistake at 70 miles an hour. You never forget the way your helmet fills with a sound you didn't make. And you never, ever forget the first time your body feels like a second rider climbs in and takes the bars. They say it happens to everyone sooner or later. You ride open face on a warm evening, visor cracked just enough to pull the heat off your cheeks. June, highway shoulder grass glossy with dew, dragonflies stitching the air with invisible thread. Then the universe picks one bug, one nothing of a creature, lines it up with your wind, your mouth, your luck, and fires. Mason Cole was the kind of rider who didn't scare easy. Late 30s, hands nicked from years wrenching at the shop, the steady patience of people who've broken bolts without breaking their temper. He commuted on two wheels because he liked arriving awake. He toured the county at night because engines sound different under stars. And on a Thursday in June, he was coming back from his sister's place on County 12 when he learned what happens when a mouth is open at the wrong time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a horror movie jar of spiders. It was a small thing, soft, then sharp, tap-tap against his teeth, a flick against the uvula, a reflex swallow his brain decided before he could vote. He coughed inside the helmet, and the cough slammed back, airless, because his throat had locked around what it thought was a threat. He signaled and drifted to the shoulder, even though there was nothing behind him but a truck a mile back. He killed the throttle, coasted, braked, boots down, gloves ripped at the D-rings, helmet off, spit, nothing. Water bottle, swish, spit. The something wasn't in his mouth anymore. It was lower, where spit doesn't reach. He stood there bent over the ditch, tasting the metallic ghost of adrenaline, and trying not to picture the insect wriggling, trying not to name it. His phone flashlight did that cold LED thing of making green things look sick. The truck blew by and the driver didn't slow because men on the side of the road at night are a category you don't stop for unless their clothes are on fire. Mason swallowed as hard as the human throat can swallow. He felt something answer, not move exactly, but argue. A tiny, raw-edged protest from a place you can't scratch without tools. He waited 5 minutes. 10. When the coughs thinned from panic to habit, he put the helmet back on, cracked the visor just enough so air could be air, and rode the last 8 miles home. He told himself a thing people tell themselves in bathrooms and ER waiting rooms and quiet kitchens at 3 a.m. It'll work itself out. That sentence is a coin flip when you live long enough. Sometimes it lands your way. Sometimes it doesn't. The next morning, his voice sounded like it had slept under a truck. Gravel on the low notes, a whistle on the highs. At the shop, Marty, whose jokes came pre-greased, said, "You pick up smoking again or fighting fence posts?" Mason smiled, drank water, swallowed careful. He kept catching the same sensation. Not pain. Awareness. As if the throat had grown a new instrument he hadn't learned to play. By lunch, it came with sound, not in his ears, deeper. A faint tapping, out of phase with his pulse, not random, tapping with intent. Tap, tap, pause, tap. If you don't ride, you don't know how many noises your body keeps to itself. The helmet becomes a room with just you inside, the bite of your teeth, the opening of your eustachian tubes, the wet click of a swallow. Motorcycles make you intimate with your own machine. That afternoon, Mason heard a new one. It tuned itself under words, answered water, grew quiet when he held his breath. It was real. He proved it to himself the way men do. He didn't tell anyone and gathered data alone. That night, he tried the remedies the internet promises and the older men swear by. Bread heel, peanut butter on a spoon, a shot of cheap whiskey to stun it. He coughed until he thought he'd turned his esophagus inside out. For an hour, he sat on the tub edge with the shower hot and let the steam argue with the thing he couldn't name. Steam lost. At 2 in the morning, he took his phone into the bathroom, turned the camera light to full, opened his mouth wide in the mirror, and did something he had never done with that level of concentration. He watched his own throat move. The soft palate lifted, the uvula bobbed. Muscle rings worked like someone had put a transparent glove over a rubber band ball. Nothing looked wrong until he made a low hum. Then he saw it. The tiniest, briefest break in the symmetry. The left wall of his throat, not the tube down, but the tube's skin, quivered in a way the right did not. Almost nothing. But once your brain sees an almost nothing on your own body, it will not stop looking until it classifies it as part of you or part of a problem. He slept in pieces. When dawn pushed the blinds into stripes, he got up angry at the stripes. He rode to urgent care because the ER felt like an insult he hadn't earned. The nurse took his temperature and blood pressure. The physician assistant said, "Open," and he did. "Probably a scratch," she said. "We get this all the time during bug season." She prescribed a numbing rinse and said the sentence professionals use when they have seen 1,000 versions of a thing and 98% resolve on their own. Give it a couple days. He gave it 2. The sound didn't stop. It grew clever. If he stayed quiet, it matched his breaths. If he hummed, it paused. If he swallowed on purpose, it waited until he finished and then, like a petty roommate, made its noise louder to reassert the room was shared. By Saturday afternoon, Mason understood that he was not going to think his way out of this. He also understood he was not the kind of person who would post a problem like this online and wait to be told to gargle vinegar. He did something simpler, which is how most complicated things begin. He rode. The bike was a big twin with manners. It told the truth about the road and didn't punish you for small sins. He went out past the last subdivision where the streetlights give up, into the ribbon between corn and soybeans, where a man can ride straight long enough to set his breathing to a metronome. The sky was one of those Midwestern blue slabs the color photographers try to sell to people who've never had to live under them. His speed held steady with the confidence of a needle that had a job and liked it. At 65, the noise settled. Not silence exactly, but a detente. At 72, it changed its mind. A new rhythm stacked itself on top of the first, faster, more insistent, like a second person tapping a pencil on the table 2 chairs away. Mason rolled the throttle down. The tapping softened. He rolled it up. The tapping answered with enthusiasm. He said something inside the helmet that is not printable and is also not a prayer. At the next turnout, he stopped, killed the engine, and waited to see if the noise was truly synced with speed or just the mind's tendency to make graphs out of coincidence. Wind, birds, the long freight a county over. Inside him, the ghost of the tap. Then nothing. Then one decisive knock as if to say, "I'm still here." He found an empty farm road and started doing the kind of test you'd mock a friend for if they told you later. 5th gear, 55. Hum a low note and watch the mirror of your own throat in your mind. Does it answer? It does. Drop to 4th, 60. Does it answer faster? It does. Brake, 45. Does it sulk? It does. Repeat something you don't want to become true until it hardens. He needed someone to tell him what it was without laughing. He made a call to a guy who owed him, which is how men say friend when they don't want to say need. Entomology, the guy said when he picked up, which is bugs if you're trying to sound smart. "What did you break now, Mace? Carb needles? Your pride?" "I swallowed one," Mason said. "On the bike." "A bug?" "Yeah." "No refunds," the guy said, but his voice softened. "You all right?" "Define all right. You breathing?" "Yes." "You coughing blood?" "No." "You feverish?" "No." "Then you're alive," the guy said. "It'll pass." "They do." "What if it didn't?" Mason said. "Hypothetically." The guy made a small that sounded like he'd turned from joking to imagining a case file. "Certain beetles have spines," he said. Some wasps carry ovipositors. No. Relax. They don't lay in throats. You're thinking botflies. Different country, different nightmare. Worst case, it stung you on the way down. You've got edema. Or you ding the mucosa and you feel every swallow like it's a crime. Why? What's it doing? Mason told him about the tapping sync to speed. Huh? The guy said again. You ever heard of stridulation? English. Crickets, the guy said. They make sound by rubbing parts. Some species can produce vibrations through whatever they're pressed against. There are beetles that can drum inside wood. There are larvae that call their mothers by clicking their mouth hooks against a surface. I don't think you've got a baby anything, he added quickly, hearing Mason's silence change shape. But you might be amplifying a sensation with your own resonance. Helmets change what you hear. Your own skull changes what you hear. If you're certain there's a foreign body, you need an ENT to scope you. Or dash dash. Or what? Or it's nothing, he said gently. And you've given it a name. Mason didn't want that sentence in his house. He thanked the guy, hung up, and stood in the bake of a shoulder in June looking at the shadow of his bike like it could vote with him against reality. He got back on. He went looking for a hill. Speed changes what you think is important. You can spend an entire week worrying about a bill, a look, a word somebody used in a meeting, and then one hornet finds the inside of your helmet and your universe empties so you can fix one thing. Pull over without dying. That Saturday, Mason learned a new kind of priority. The kind you can't explain to someone who isn't inside a helmet with a problem. Halfway up the grade on Old Mill Road, he felt the tap become a scrape. Not long. A single note like something passed a fingernail along a zipper tooth. It hid behind a swallow, then the next swallow, then came again. He couldn't tell if it was higher or lower than his voice, because fear changed the key he lived in. He crested the hill and rolled down. The scrape faded. The tap resumed. At the bottom, a stop sign, a field, a house he'd passed 100 times without noticing the swing set slowly rusting itself back to ore. He sat at the sign with the bike idling and tried a stupid thing. He sang, not loud, into the corner of his mouth so the neighborhood wouldn't have to decide if it felt sorry for him. A low note first, the kind of tone a man makes when he wants to calm a horse that doesn't need calming. Then higher, where his voice goes thin. At a G above low C, the tap stopped. At an A, it returned. Doubled. He dropped back to G. Silence inside the action. He held it. The human body hums like a machine when you give it permission. So did his throat. He looked insane and felt like a scientist. The stop sign didn't object. The swing set kept rusting. He went home with one sentence in his head that he didn't want to say out loud. I can control it. That night he didn't eat much. He drank water like it was a plan. He put the numbing rinse in and found it only made the new instrument quieter, not absent. He watched a video of a laryngoscopy on mute and decided that if he had to, if it became an emergency, he could tolerate a scope. He fell asleep with the phone face down because he didn't want to see the screen from the mirror. At 3 a.m, he woke to a sensation he would not have believed you could wake to. You know how sometimes a dream gives you a sound the waking room continues. A car alarm becomes a phone becomes a kettle becomes the upstairs neighbor's shoes. Mason's dream was the old clapboard house he'd grown up in, and a boy was under the porch tapping to be let out. He woke to tapping. Not the throat tap, external, his nightstand. Tap, tap, tap. He sat up so fast the room lurched. The tapping stopped. The house went back to its ordinary insomnia, air moving through ducts, the kitchen ice maker practicing a gift. He lay down, said his name quietly so he'd know someone was there, and waited out a silence that learned how to feel guilty. In the morning, there was a mark on the varnish, not a dent, not a scratch. A circle where a cold glass had once stood too long. He put his finger in it and decided not to tell anyone about the dream ever again. By Monday, the ordinary world returned with its emails and needs. The shop had a battery tender sale, and men with opinions came to buy cords. Mason found he could get through conversations by coloring inside the lines of words that didn't require range. Yeah, we can do that noon. He avoided the long vowels like a man stepping around a puddle he suspected was deeper than it looked. The noise obeyed his rules until it didn't. At 4:30, on a short test ride after a tire change, he hit 58, and the tap turned into a run of machine gun syllables against a place nothing should be able to touch. His hands went light on the bars for the smallest dangerous second. He eased down. The road widened in his vision, the way roads do when you're trying to collect the universe back into one lane. He got the bike to the lot, kicked the stand, and sat on the curb with his helmet in his lap. Marty came out and said, "You look like you just ate a June bug," and laughed at his own joke until he stopped. "Wait, did you?" "Yeah," Mason said. "Gross, you all right?" "Define all right. Hospital?" "Maybe ENT," Mason said. "Scope." Marty squinted at him with the practical mercy of people who can tell the difference between a joke and a man standing next to a joke because he wants you to choose the right one for him. "Go now," he said. "I'll close." "Your eyes look like you haven't blinked since Thursday." "After I finish the strom," Mason said, pointing at the bike on the lift, because pointing at work is a way to keep your hands from asking for help. "Go," Marty said again. "I'll finish the strom. You'll still hate hospitals later." Mason went. An ENT office at 5:20 p.m. feels like a compromise. Too late to be reassuring, too early to be emergency. A resident did the pre-check. The doctor came in with the kind face of people who look down throats all day and don't take it personally. "We'll scope," she said. "You'll hate it for a minute, and then I'll tell you you're fine." He nodded. He wasn't proud. He just wanted a verdict. They sat him in a chair that felt like it had witnessed the life stories of 1,000 uvulas. She sprayed a numbing mist that made him wonder if human beings are supposed to taste that particular chemical. The scope went in through the nose. He hadn't expected that, and the world became a camera ride down a hallway he recognized but had never toured. "There's some inflammation," she said, narrating for both of them. "Right lateral wall, mild edema at the base of tongue, no foreign body visualized, no bleeding, no lesions. And your cords look good. See there?" He saw there. It looked like an animal he had never met, posing for a passport photo. "So what's making the sensation?" he asked. "Could be a small scratch that's now a fixation," she said kindly. "Could be a little pocket of swelling that makes you feel every swallow. The larynx is a drama queen. Small changes, big feelings. I'll put you on a short steroid taper and something for reflux. Eat gentle for a week. No hot sauce, no whiskey. If it persists, we can image. But I don't see anything I'd chase with a CT." "What about sound?" he said, and he hated how that made him sound. "Not voice. Sound, I hear. Like tapping." She didn't smile at that. She didn't roll her eyes. She had the face of someone who had promised herself to never become the doctor who made fun of patients in the parking lot. "Sometimes after an insult you become aware of body sounds you were ignoring," she said. "Blood, cartilage clicks, eustachian tubes. It's like when you notice your tongue and can't stop noticing your tongue. Ride with your visor down for a week," she added, practical. "Let the tissue cool off. Your throat is telling you it wants a break from the world." "What if I can't give it one?" he said. "Then the world wins," she said, and her smile was not unkind. He walked out at dusk with a white bag that said pharmacy and a new talent for swallowing pills like he'd been hired to do it professionally. He went home, made bland noodles, stared at the bottle of hot sauce like it had talked bad about him, and turned in early. At 2:11 a.m., the same minute the dog had woken 2 nights before, he woke to the sense that the inside of his throat was being mapped by something very small and very careful using a very old method. Knock, wait, knock. He lay there with his hands flat on the sheets like he was being polite to gravity and told himself he could outstare his own body's need for answers. Tuesday, he didn't ride. He took the truck to the shop and felt like a man who had cheated on a friend. The day stretched. His voice softened a little, maybe from the steroid, maybe because relief wears the same clothes as pills. He whistled once by accident when he bent to pick up a socket, and the sound answered from his chest like he'd discovered a second mouth south of the first. That night he made a decision he would pretend later had been smart. He went back out. He told himself it was to test. He told himself he was checking a hypothesis. If visor down truly changed the sensation, it was just airflow and nerves. If it didn't, he would have to expand the map of his fear. The county was empty in that way. It gets midweek at 9:30 when the families are home and the single men haven't decided which bar is worth their electricity. He took Old Mill again because people do that when they're afraid. They revisit the last place they were the person they were before the fear felt official. The visor was down. The night pressed soft against the clear plastic. He kept his breathing even inside the little weather he had made for himself. At 58, the tap began, and he braced for the scrape. It didn't come. He passed 62, and the tap held steady, like a metronome put on the wrong side of a closed door. He breathed. He exhaled. He looked at the white paint along the edge of the lane and watched it unspool into the species of straight that happens when human beings insist on pretending the earth is flat enough to draw lines on. The road dipped. The visor fogged the smallest bit at the lip. He cracked it with a gloved finger and the world arrived. The tap doubled. He shut the visor. The tap stayed doubled. The bike hit a seam. The tap stuttered in a staccato that didn't belong to tires or pavement or his heart. He slowed, pulled to a turnout that has collected the private decisions of 30 years of county couples, and killed the engine. Silence. Then, from inside him, a long, thread-thin scrape. He leaned over the bars and put his forehead on the cool crown of the tank, the way you put your head on a desk when the substitute teacher doesn't care. He whispered his name because sometimes that sound helps when no other sound will. Something moved. Not down, not up, sideways. It wasn't large, it was committed. He left the bike and walked into the dark like a man who had agreed to meet someone and no longer wanted to be seen doing it. He gagged twice and nothing came up because he didn't actually want it out on the shoulder under a sky that didn't sign an NDA. He went back, mounted, hit the starter, and rolled home with the posture of a man who is trying not to make his own problem worse by thinking about it in the wrong shape. Wednesday morning, he woke with a taste like pennies. He checked in the mirror and saw nothing except a redness he tried to convince himself lived there yesterday. He ate yogurt like a man who had committed some private vow to avoid edges. He put on his jacket. He told himself he would not ride that night. He lied. At the shop, a woman rolled in with a flat, and it looked like the flat was one more thing in a bag she had been carrying too long. Mason fixed it in 20 minutes and refused the tip. Her mouth did a thing as she tried to calculate if refusing the tip was the first nice thing that had happened to her that day or an additional humiliation. She finally said, "Thanks," in a way that meant, "You didn't make this worse," which is a kind of praise men should get more often. He made it to 8 p.m. before the house felt like it had been arranged by his problem. He put the helmet on in the kitchen. He took it off in the kitchen. He sat on the step by the back door and told himself that his life was still his life, and a bug was not a curse. And then a sound arrived from inside him that he had not heard before, and everything he had told himself fell onto the concrete like a box of bolts. It was a chirp. Not a tap, not a scrape. A high, thin syllable shaped like wire. It came once, then after a pause calculated to ruin whatever calm he had left, It came again. He stood in the dark yard holding his helmet like it was a head he had borrowed. He was not scared of insects. He had taken stings like a man takes the fall after a stupid joke. But the sound of a chirp inside the human throat as a category of sound evolution did not intend to be instructive. He rode. There is a point at which speed feels like the only tool big enough for a small problem. He didn't say that out loud because if you say it out loud, you sound like a headline. He just did what men do when the world gives them a sensation they cannot categorize. He applied the last thing that had made him feel like a person: motion. At 75, the chirp became a tremolo. At 80, it disappeared into a bass vibration that made his hands picture the texture of asphalt at a microscopic level. At 85, it returned as a whole conversation he was not invited to decode. He backed down. The road shrugged, then forgave him. Old Mill gives way to the ridgeline in a way that feels like the county is lowering you into the throat of something polite. He took the curve under the radio tower and saw a pair of eyes on the right. Deer. No, not deer. Height wrong. Coyote. No, not coyote. Stand wrong. Human. And then the eyes became reflectors on a mailbox because eyes very often do that at night. He laughed inside the helmet at his own mistake, and the laugh made the chirp answer in an excited trill like he had told it a joke. He coasted. He let the bike's own weight be more than his decisions. He found a straight, eased off, and just listened. The chirp came again. It wasn't random. The pattern was repeatable in the way bad ideas are repeatable. He held a low G. The tap vanished. He slid up to A. The chirp arrived. He went back to G. Silence. Up again. There. It was him then, his own resonance. Whatever was inside him had a favorite note. He rode home without music because his body was an instrument, and adding another would have felt like inviting a third person to a fight. When men finally tell someone the thing that is going to embarrass them, we usually pick a person we can stand to be embarrassed in front of. For Mason, that was his sister, Tessa. She had a way of laughing with him that also allowed him not to be the punchline if he couldn't handle it that day. He told her the story on her front porch with the cicadas working a union shift in the trees. She didn't say, "That's insane," or "Go to the ER," or "You're making it worse by paying attention," even though she'd have been allowed. She said, "Okay. I've had a popcorn hole between my gum and a molar for 24 hours, and I thought about pulling the tooth myself with pliers from the glove box. So, I believe you." He loved her for that sentence in a way he didn't know how to repay. "What do I do?" he asked her. "Get it named," she said. "Things suck less when somebody in a coat writes them down and names them and tells you they've seen worse." "I did," he said. "Scope. No foreign body." She made a face that was half sympathy, half, "You should still set your kitchen timer when you bake." "Then you'll have to be the coat," she said. "You'll have to write it down yourself, track it. Time, speed, food, note, noise. If it's in your head, it still follows rules. If it's in your throat, it still follows rules. The body loves rules. Find them. And it's smaller." He did the thing men do when our sisters tell us exactly what to do. He pretended we'd already thought of it, and then did it that night. He drew a grid in a notebook and made columns for speed, note, noise, swallow, visor, wind. He rode for 20 minutes and filled the grid with a hand that had done carb rebuilds in crosswinds. When he got home, he looked at the sheet and knew two things. One, Tessa was right. And two, he was about to learn something he didn't want. At 73 on Old Mill, with the visor cracked 2 clicks, the noise was strongest. At 61, visor down, lowest. At 67, visor down, but humming at G, gone. At 73, visor cracked with G, quieter. The pattern was stupidly clear. He could control it, but controlling it meant giving it a place to live. He wasn't sure which future he hated more, The one where it ran him, or the one where he had to tend it like a small, rude pet that had moved into his throat without applying for a lease? The week slid around him. He worked. He smiled with his eyes more than his mouth. He slept in bursts and woke like he was being paged. The tap and chirp learned his calendar. They knocked when the shop was busy. They took breaks when he was with Tessa's kids because kids fill rooms with a note no other note can dislodge. Saturday came back around and he did what men do when they can't think their way out of a room. He made the room bigger. He planned a long ride. Leave at dusk. County 12 to Old Mill to the Ridge. Over the ridge into the long valley where the highway gives you a straight backed by stars you can measure without apps. Out to the truck stop at mile 104 where the coffee is honest and the pie is a dare. Then back. A loop, not a chase. He told no one because he was not scared, he was just busy, which is the sentence you use when you are, in fact, scared. He left as the sky was still blue enough to pretend it wasn't night yet. The first 5 miles gave him to himself. The next 10 made him a mathematician again. He found G, made the sound, held it like a man tuning a tool by ear. The chirp didn't vanish, but it accepted the deal. He rode into the valley grinning at the dark like it had left him a seat. At mile 104, he took the exit, rolled into the puddle of light that makes truckers look like saints in stained glass, and parked nose out the way men do when we expect to leave before our coffee cools. Inside, the night staff waved without judgment. He drank a cup that tasted like decisions and watched a woman in a reflective vest buy sausage biscuits like she was doing math for tomorrow. He felt almost lonely and then realized the almost was the part he trusted. On the way out, he saw a poster taped to the window beside the door. Missing, local handyman, Lyle R. Last seen. He didn't read the rest because he didn't want to connect any dots that didn't belong to his picture. He mounted. He rolled back out to the ramp. Halfway up the merge, he learned the worst version of his rule. At 73, visor cracked 2 clicks. The noise was strongest. At 73, visor cracked 3 clicks. It changed. He didn't understand what he was hearing because there isn't a word for the sound a small thing makes when it finds another small thing of its kind in a place where no things of that kind belong. It wasn't a chirp. It wasn't a tap. It was an exchange. He shut the visor so hard the latch clicked like a judge. The exchange stopped. He breathed. He whispered, "G, silence." He held it like you hold a door shut when a stranger who has the wrong house tries the knob. He went home the long way, not because he feared the highway, but because the county roads had fewer places where another second person could be waiting at 73 with a third click of air. He lasted until Monday before he broke his own promise to himself and bought something he had spent years mocking. A full face with a chin bar and a visor that sealed like a submarine. He told Marty it was because of dust, which is a word men use when we mean fear, and we are not brave enough to test if our friend is a kind one. The new lid changed the acoustics of his life. It also gave him a ritual: cinch, seal, tap the visor with 2 knuckles because superstition doesn't need permission if it intends to keep you. The first ride with it was a relief so full it embarrassed him. 50, quiet. 60, quiet. 70, quiet. He laughed, and the laugh didn't earn a trill. He took a hand off the bar to fix his mirror, and the universe did not take his hand as a dare. He went 3 days without chirp. He slept. He ate hot sauce. He believed in prescriptions and plastics and his own ability to make good choices. He almost told Tessa he was fine, which is the lie sisters forgive you for because they've told it themselves and recognized the shape of your jaw when you do it. On the 4th day, he put the old helmet back on because he missed the air. He didn't do it to test. He didn't do it to provoke. He did it because he is a mammal who loved a sensation he had trained into his life. warm night air on skin, doing 60 past field and fence. The human brain will burn down a safe house for a memory of a breeze. He cracked the visor 2 clicks and felt the night again, and the night felt like the apology he had been waiting for. Old Mill Ridge. The radio tower blinked its aircraft warning like a slow yes. He eased to 73 out of muscle memory, not need. The chirp came back like he'd unpaused a song. He could have shut the visor. He could have turned around. He could have taken the new lid home and made peace with being a person who lived without a certain sensation, because not all pleasures are worth the way they hook into you. Instead, he did what fear and curiosity make men do in alternating measure. He went 1 click farther. Air. The noise multiplied. He held steady. He rode into the sound like it had asked him to meet behind the bandstand to talk. It answered. It didn't hide how glad it was. He crested the ridge. The world spread. On the left, the radio tower stood with its guy wires like long violin strings the wind plucked for mile-long songs. On the right, the old quarry's water caught starlight like a dropped pocketful of change. At that exact moment, a moth hit his temple pad and died. He flinched. The bike drifted. He corrected. The chirp went rail thin like wire pulled taffy tight. He realized he was listening for a second voice. He didn't want to know if he'd hear it. He already did. He shut the visor. The conversation stopped the way a room stops talking when a principal walks in. He rode home with his jaw clenched so hard his molars left their opinions on each other. Men negotiate with themselves when the world gets weird. You change one variable at a time like a scientist who only answers to failure. Mason told himself he would not wear the old helmet for a week. He made it 5 days. He told himself he would not ride Old Mill. He made it 3. He told himself he would accept that control, not cure, was the longest truce on the table. He made it until he saw a flyer for a night ride fundraiser for a kid with a medical bill and remembered that riding had taught him generosity and he couldn't let fear take that lesson too. He went. 50 bikes in a row sound like an army learning how to breathe together. They took the loop the county police had agreed to ignore. They did hand signals like they were signing to the road. Single file, debris, stagger, thank you. Mason sat middle third and let the pack be his weather. The new lid kept the air honest, the chirp civilized. Halfway through, a man on a sport bike did the thing sport bike men do when they see a long, smooth straight, the same thing cowboys do when they see a gate someone forgot to close. He rolled on. The pack stretched thin like taffy pulled by a distracted cook. Instinct moved through the line in a way no organism other than human beings on motorcycles can learn to do. They made room without talking. They let him go. Mason felt that old itch. He could keep his place. He could keep the peace. He could also loosen his hand just once and feel something other than maintenance be the reason the world happened at the speed it happened. He rolled on. 70, 80, 90. The new lid sealed. The world narrowed to a stripe. The chirp hid, which felt like victory until he realized he had missed it like a habit. He hated that thought the way you hate catching yourself wanting the sound a thing of yours makes when it breaks. At 92, a deer crossed far up, and he eased. The chirp came back like a child who thought it was safe. He stayed with the pack. He didn't try to be the man who got the ticket and the story. He did his job, be a witness to a lane. The ride ended in the lot behind a bowling alley that had surrendered its pride to a new chain a decade ago, but still rented shoes to teenagers who needed to pretend they were dates. Men took helmets off and did the posture of people who want to look like the ride didn't move them and failed. Mason laughed with them and drank warm soda from a cooler and thought briefly about telling someone what was happening to him. He didn't. He kept his problem private because sometimes that's the only way you can stand to be the person who has it. On the ride home alone, the chirp visited 4 times. Once at the crease where County 8 falls into 12. Once in the shadow of the overpass where graffiti has been arguing with county paint for years. once on the empty straight, where an owl flew across his headlight and turned its round coin face to him and moved on. And once, right before his exit, when the air did nothing obvious that he could blame. He slept. He dreamed of small hands tapping on wood from inside walls. It got better. That's the cruel part. It got better long enough that he believed the story about these things resolve. He woke 2 mornings in a row without the metal taste. He forgot to do the swallow that tested the left wall of his throat for tremor. He went an entire day without singing G under his breath like a note could be a lever big enough for a problem that did not believe in leverage. On the 3rd day, he took the truck to the shop and felt nothing he needed to name between breaths. At lunch, he sat on the tailgate and ate a sandwich that had edges and didn't punish him. He looked at the bike and felt love and not duty. He believed he had tamed the thing he had swallowed by not feeding it attention. He rode that night visor up 2 clicks because memory is a thief who comes back for you when you least expect it. At 73, the chirp did not come. At 80, the tap did not come. He climbed the ridge, and the world said, generous and merciless as always, "You may have your moment." At the top, a semi took the downhill too hot and threw a sheet of grit across the right lane. Mason saw it in time and shifted left. The bike solved the problem with dignity. A moth hit his cheek pad and made a little sound like cotton discovering electricity. He laughed. He was okay. At the bottom, at the last turnout before the valley, the chirp came back. Not 1 voice. 2. He shut the visor. Silence. He turned his head the smallest degree to change the airflow on the helmet lip. 2 voices. He rolled off to 50, 2 voices in a lower key. He pulled to the turnout and listened to his heart until his heart won the argument. He went home slowly. In the mirror, he looked down his own throat and saw nothing except a man trying to forgive himself for being scared of something small. There is a point in every story like this where the person either chooses the hospital or chooses the road. Mason chose the road. That doesn't make him a hero. It makes him a rider with a problem and an ego, which is the same thing said out loud. He decided he was going to end it by force. Shock it out, shake it loose, let speed argue with whatever held on. He said nothing to anyone because people who love you try to keep you alive, and he didn't want to negotiate with their love. He put the old helmet on like he was putting on a glove that fit worse but meant more. Night. No moon. The county felt like a room where someone had turned the lights off but left all the furniture in place. He took the long on-ramp and rolled on. 60, 70, 75. The chirp came like a child running to the door because they heard keys. He kept going. 80. The chirp thinned. 85. Silence. He laughed. There's a sound men make alone that sounds like victory and grief hugging and neither wanting to let go first. He went to 90. At 90, the crosswind at the cut between the silos did what it always does. It leaned on him. The bike moved the correct amount. Mason held. The visor was shut. He cracked it 1 click because air is a drug. The chirp returned like it had been waiting just outside the edge of a window. He went to 95 to wash it out in wind. Something small chose that exact moment to work its way under the seal at his eye and sting the corner where skin is thin and regret is thick. He flinched. The bike drifted. He corrected. The front felt light for less than a thought. He changed lanes because changing something felt like doing something. A car coming up behind him did not expect a man to make private choices across public lines. It flashed brights, braked, honked. He eased back. He let the car go because pride is a currency that doesn't buy you anything at the speed you'll need it. He pulled off at the next exit and parked on the shoulder under an overpass. He took the helmet off and set it carefully on the seat, like he was putting a child to bed who might wake if you put it down too fast. He sat with his back against cold concrete and counted 3 things he could hear that were not his body. Distant tires, a frog, a flag's luff on a pole he couldn't see. When he put the helmet back on, he shut the visor and promised himself he would not open it until he was in his driveway. He kept the promise. He went to sleep with a folded dish towel over the mirror in the hall. You want an ending. You want the thing to come out. You want it to be a moth wing. He hacks into a napkin and laughs at, and you want me to tell you he taped the napkin in the shop bathroom with a Sharpie note that says I win so you can think about luck like a muscle you can exercise. That's not what happened. What happened is this. It faded, like a bruise. Like a song you grew out of but still recognize by the first 3 seconds of the first chord. The steroid did something. The tissue did something. Or time did the thing time does when you don't make a religion out of your pain. He switched permanently to the full face. He became the guy who taps his visor twice before he rolls. He carries a little squeezy bottle of water and a packet of sugar in his jacket now. Trucker trick. Makes things less interesting if they go where they don't belong. He learned to keep his mouth closed at speed like a man who finally believes the world isn't obligated to be kind to your soft parts. He still hears it sometimes. Not the tap, not the chirp, the pause where those used to be. He'll be at 48 through town and a certain shape of wind will kiss the edge of the helmet seal, and his throat will remember how to be a room with a second person in it. He hums a low G under his breath and the room becomes his again. I could lie to you and tell you he cut his throat open on a kitchen island with a mirror and a flashlight and a patience you don't get to borrow and pulled from himself a cricket leg and put it in a jar. I could tell you a story about larvae and mothers and the way things insist on being born in places they weren't invited. But that's not what Haunted Throttle tells you. We tell you the truth that feels like the story you were already afraid was true. That sometimes your body becomes a house with a sound you can't evict, and the work isn't exorcism, it's property management. Mason still rides Old Mill. He still crests the ridge under the radio tower and thinks for half a second that the guy wires are strings only a giant could pluck. He still loves the hour when the county holds its breath waiting to choose between blue and black. He buys full-face lids now when they're on sale and gives them to kids who come into the shop on 200s and 50s with big eyes and bad ideas about immortality. He says, "Wear this." And when they roll their eyes, he says, "I swallowed a bug once," and that is somehow enough. If you see a man on a big twin on County 12 at dusk, tapping his visor twice like a superstition he's not ready to retire, that's probably him. Or that's all of us, in our ways, making deals with the air. And if you ever find yourself at 73 with your mouth open in June and the universe throws a seed into you, do the 2 things that have kept men alive long enough to tell stories around oil stains and diner coffee, shut the visor, and keep riding the line. Not because the road cures anything, but because it gives you something truer than fear to listen to.